Hello, this is Jenny Burney, and I'm here today with Christy Spears-Neumeister. There are many characteristics of gifted learners, but today we are going to focus on the learning characteristics of gifted students.
Okay, and as we talk about the learning characteristics, we should make a few disclaimers right off the top of our heads. We can think about the fact that not all gifted students are going to have all of the characteristics that we're going to talk about today. And likewise, just because some students have some of the characteristics, that doesn't necessarily make them high ability or gifted. And finally, we need to remember that the characteristics can have both positive and negative manifestations depending on how well suited the curriculum and instruction are to that high ability child's needs. We put some of these characteristics on the screen for you now, and we'll just go through them briefly with you so you can see what some of those positive and negative manifestations might be. Starting with learns new things quickly, the typical learner takes about 7 to 8 repetitions to learn a new concept, which is why we teach so many different ways of reinforcing the new concepts they're learning. A high ability child, on the other hand, can read or understand a new concept in about 1 to 2 repetitions, enabling them to move through the curriculum at a much faster pace and allowing you to go more in depth than is possible with a typical learner. However, if the pace isn't the right speed for these advanced learners, they may find themselves with too much extra time, and then some of those students aren't going to use that time in a productive manner. Okay, extensive vocabulary is another learning characteristic that we oftentimes recognize very early on with these high ability learners. Maybe it's a kindergartner who sounds more like a second or third grader in terms of the vocabulary that they use. However, this characteristic isn't always appreciated among their peers. They may feel like they're being talked down to, or the peers don't necessarily understand the student and may, in some instances, make fun of that child for their vocabulary. Okay, grasp math concepts. Okay, many high ability students are able to easily think at a conceptual level, which enables them to grasp math concepts very intuitively. As a teacher, that's exciting because you want your students to get at that conceptual level. However, it can sometimes present a problem for your high ability students when they're required to show their work. They may not always be able to articulate in a step-by-step fashion how they solve the problem, and they're frustrated with the request to do so. Okay, as we want to build their reflective knowledge and their understanding of their own learning, though, we really need to encourage the development of these skills even when they don't come naturally to those students. Okay. Grasping the big picture and being able to make connections. Okay. Just as these students are able to understand math concepts very easily because of their conceptual thinking abilities, high ability students can often see the big picture. They're whole-to-part thinkers. Okay, that means that they need to see how everything fits together first before they can see the individual steps or the elements. This learning style is beneficial in that it allows them to easily make cross-disciplinary connections with ease. But the problem can come into play when the teacher or the other students have an opposite learning style in which they are more part to whole, meaning they need to see the steps first before they can see the big picture. And that mismatch is sometimes problematic in the way that these students are taught the concepts in a step-by-step way when they would prefer to see that whole picture first. Okay, thinking differently and being creative is another characteristic that these high ability kids may demonstrate. They're excellent problem solvers as a result of their way to take on different perspectives and approach problems from a different angle than we would typically see. As problem solving and creative thinking are valued skills that we want to develop in our students, the ability to think in this way is definitely valued. However, in the classroom, it can be a little bit problematic for the teacher when the student might be questioning the directions or the reason that they're required to do something. They might seem like they're constantly pushing and resisting when really the ability to question in that way is needed in order to be able to problem solve. So we just need to figure out a balance for that type of behavior.
I want to talk a little bit about asynchronous development. One thing to remember is that these children do have that asynchronous development, and what we mean by that is that the aspects of their development may be out of sync with one another. We usually think of this more broadly in terms of the possibility of a student's ability not being equally strong in all content areas. By that we mean that just because a student is very advanced in math does not mean that he or she will be equally strong in language arts, for example. However, this asynchrony will manifest itself in a particular way in relationship to language arts. Students with strength in the area of language arts will have an ability to read and use advanced vocabulary correctly, but they may not understand some of the content or the references contained within a selected piece of literature that's written at the appropriate reading level for them. This is an issue, especially with gifted students in early adolescence, in that the adult content or issues are found within many classic pieces of literature. They might be intellectually able to handle the actual reading, but socially or emotionally they are not ready yet for the content and its implications. Remember, too, that these children are frequently extremely sensitive, and they will have difficulty with graphic content related to death or war or cruelty and so forth.
Okay, as we think about those learning characteristics we just talked about, we're going to segue into thinking about the skills and the strategies for teaching our high ability students and how those characteristics interface with those goals and those strategies. Okay, we know that high ability students need more than just content knowledge to be successful. We created this graphic to represent the 7 C's that we think are necessary for success in any domain. Yes, content knowledge is always going to be important, but that alone isn't enough to be successful. Students also need both critical and creative thinking skills, so they're able to critically analyze the abundance of information that will be available to them, as well as to put that information together in novel ways to solve problems. They also need to collaborate well with others and to communicate their ideas in a variety of formats. And finally, they need the affective skills too, to be confident and to also make sure that they're committed to a task in order to take the risks that are necessary to be successful, as well as to persist through challenge and setbacks.
So we want to talk really about the dimensions of teaching the gifted. There are several of these, some features of the educational experiences that are most appropriate for gifted learners. Not all of these would have to be in every lesson, but when we think about units of study and the articulation of learning over a period of years, these are the elements that need to be consistently found in curriculum and instruction for the gifted. Critical and creative thinking. We talked about this already just a little bit, but and we cannot really go into depth in this short learning module about how critical and creative thinking are developed, but these are the hallmarks of gifted education. The gifted child can read and comprehend typical selections with ease, so that does not need to be the focus of instructional time usually. The teacher and the curriculum need to focus on greater in-depth analysis of literature, or on being able to synthesize information from multiple sources to create a balanced and complete summary of issues and topics. You want them to be able to take information and points of view and to create original products that reflect looking at these content, at this content or the issues involved with it from multiple perspectives or a new perspective. You also want to have authenticity. By that we mean that there would be some sort of real-world application or some audience beyond their teachers. All students are more engaged in this regard, but especially gifted children are more engaged in this. They would benefit from problem-based learning scenarios, for example, so that they can develop their own problem-solving skills with situations that could exist in the real world. Acceleration and enrichment are always components appropriate for gifted education, and certainly we would mean that the reading levels and the vocabulary need to be above typical grade level expectations. But we would say really that these students need to use vocabulary of professionals in that content area. This brings to mind, well, what about the standards? It's certainly important that all students attain the Common Core state standards and national standards in science and social studies for their grade level. But here's where pre-assessment can play a critical role. The teacher needs to find out what the student with high ability already has mastered and then be prepared to use the time that's usually dedicated to that material for going beyond or in greater depth than the curriculum for the typical student. So you will be certain that students have mastered the grade level standards, but gifted education will frequently address standards that are above grade level for the gifted learner. Now, metacognition. What is metacognition? Well, this is the purposeful thinking about one's own thinking and learning process. So this is the analysis of learning tasks and selecting the appropriate strategy for reaching the goal. It's the connecting of new information to what was previously learned or to knowledge in a different discipline. It's the planning of our work and the learning for efficiency and for effectiveness. Learning experiences for the student with high ability will include the teaching of metacognitive strategies. And of course, there's choice. When the point of the lesson is more about process, the student might be able to select the content of their choice. When the focus might be on the content, then the student might be able to choose the way to demonstrate mastery. Choice is important for student engagement and for the development of independent learners. All good curriculum begins with goals. The goals for the Indiana High Ability Language Arts units are shown here, and they are the same regardless of grade level. Of course, different levels of tasks will be done at ascending grade levels, but the goals for the units remain the same. This provides consistent and articulated learning experiences over a span of grade levels. A similar pattern is seen in Indiana's Common Core standards for language arts. The language arts goals and units are aligned to these Common Core standards for Indiana. Do the units contain all of what's included in the Indiana standards? No, but these units are meant to be used over a 9 to 12 week time period. What's covered during the remainder of the year will need to address Indiana's Common Core standards as well. This brief overview of the learning characteristics hopefully allows you to see why the units have been created in the way that they have been. Thank you.